In this video, we're going to talk about vascular plants. Vascular plants are also known as tracheophytes, and they can be either seedless or seed-producing. In this video, we are going to focus on the seedless vascular plants, and in a later chapter, we will talk about the seed-producing ones in more detail. And you can see here that we have a couple of different phyla that we are going to discuss as we talk about the seedless vascular plants. So vascular plants are also known as tracheophytes, and that's because they have tracheid cells that produce the vessels. The vascular plants are the most conspicuous, and conspicuous just means that they're really noticeable. And really, I'm going to cross out seedless here because this information actually applies to all vascular plants. And then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about seedless vascular plants. So the vascular plants are the dominant, most conspicuous land plants. There are over 260,000 known species, and they make up 90% of Earth's vegetation. So that's why they are the ones that you're probably more familiar with, because you can look outside and easily see a vascular plant. Now, in non-vascular plants, the gametophyte generation was dominant, and by dominant we mean the most noticeable. So once again, we can use that word conspicuous. So in vascular plants, the sporophyte generation is more noticeable. In non-vascular, they had a more noticeable gametophyte generation. Vascular plants are also able to inhabit a more diverse or variety of locations because they have roots which help with water and nutrient absorption, and their vascular tissue has that lignin molecule that is involved in support. So it's kind of a tough molecule that provides almost like a bit of a skeleton for the plant that allows it to grow taller. And by growing taller, it can have a better chance of competing for sunlight. There are two types of vascular tissue in vascular plants. We're going to talk about xylem on this slide, and on the next slide we'll talk about phloem. So xylem are vessels that are specifically involved in the storage and transport of water and minerals. So you can see on this picture here, we've got the xylem, which is absorbing water and minerals down here in the roots. And it's pulling that water and those minerals up into the other parts of the plant. So the leaves of the plant don't really need access to water on their own because they can receive it from the roots, which are able to get water from the soil. The xylem are made up of these tracheids, which are specialized conducting cells. And that's how we get the name tracheophyte. And these tracheids have that tough molecule that helps to provide support to the plant. It also makes the cells impermeable to water so that the xylem can act like a straw, sucking up the water without losing water to diffusion on its way up the plant. And that tall growth makes it possible for these plants to be more competitive when it comes to sunlight because they're able to grow taller than other plants and essentially shade the other plants to steal the sunshine for their own photosynthesis. Also, the higher up you are, the further you can disperse your spores, so that gives you a reproductive advantage as well. On this picture of a cut celery stalk, you can see these vascular bundles right here. And I believe it's the xylem that kind of makes up the very middle. And then the kind of surrounding cells are the phloem. So the phloem are also vessels in the plant, but their main job is to transport sugars, proteins, solids, and other materials from where they are made to other parts of the plant. So essentially, they take the sugars that are produced during photosynthesis and proteins and other solutes. And remember that these sugars are being made in the leaves. And so the phloem are going to take that material from the leaves and basically transport it to all the other parts of the plant to provide the plant with the nutrients or the sugars it needs in order to make ATP. On this cross section of a plant through a microscope, we can really clearly see the xylem here. So these kind of big open vessels here. And then the phloem is kind of this tissue, in this case, that is surrounding the xylem. Vascular plants also tend to have true roots. So remember, in non-vascular plants, they had rhizoids, which helped to anchor them in place, but they didn't have vascular tissue, so they were not technically real roots. A true root contains vascular tissue, because remember that xylem especially is going to take in water and minerals from the soil and transport it to the other tissues in the plants. Now these roots are able to grow because of those apical meristems. So the apical meristem tissue has stem cells, which can go through mitosis to allow for growth to happen. And then those cells can start to differentiate into other cells. So this apical meristem tissue allows roots to continue to grow and essentially grow in the direction of where the water is. And so if the water is kind of deep down in the soil, then the roots will probably grow further down towards where the water is. If the water is more shallow in the soil, then the roots will grow kind of more towards the surface of the soil. Roots also typically often form a symbiotic relationship with fungi known as mycorrhizae. This helps to increase surface area for absorption. The fungi also helps the roots to, it basically helps to make minerals available to the roots to take up into the rest of the plant. And then the plant provides the fungi with food that it makes through photosynthesis. Vascular plants also have true leaves, and these leaves are where photosynthesis is going to occur. These leaves have a large surface area that allows it to kind of maximize the amount of sunlight that it can capture. And then remember, in photosynthesis, if we look at the kind of overall reaction, remember that it takes carbon dioxide, and water. And then there are actually a lot of kind of intermediate reactions that occur, but ultimately it produces oxygen and carbohydrates. And those carbs are transported by the phloem. And then remember that the plant, the cells in the plant, can essentially do this reverse reaction, which is cellular respiration. And I forgot to mention that for photosynthesis to occur, which is this kind of forward reaction, there has to be an input of energy from the sun. And then during cellular respiration, there's actually an output of energy in the form of ATP. And so essentially, the plant does photosynthesis in order to make its own food, which in this case are the carbs. And then the cells do cellular respiration to break down those carbs, extract the energy that they originally got from the sun, and then put it into this molecule known as ATP. And then this ATP can be used by the cells in order to fuel other processes, such as chemical reactions and mitosis, meiosis, etc., etc. There are two types of leaves. There are microphylls, which are small, and they are very simple when it comes to the vascular system. So if we were to draw kind of a cartoony leaf here, they would have basically one vein running through it containing that vascular tissue. Now, megaphylls are larger, and they not only have a single vein, but then they have branched veins coming off of them. Some leaves are also sporophylls, and a sporophyll is just a modified leaf that produces sporangia. And sporangia are just the structures that contain spores. And some examples of plants that have these sporophylls are true ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. And what we're seeing in this picture here, this is a fern frond, and this is the underside of it. And the sporangia are these little clumps here that contain spores in them. And when we talk about the true ferns, we will talk a little bit more about how these develop and then how the spores disperse from them.